call questions. Questions orales. De l'opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after Prime Minister Harper managed to exempt Canada from the Buy American policies, this Prime Minister caved in and allowed Donald Trump to reimpose those tariffs. After Mr. Harper succeeded in putting an end to the softwood lumber tariffs, this Prime Minister caved in again to Donald Trump and saw those tariffs reimposed. Can Canadians have a leader that will defend jobs and bring our companies back home? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, whatever from the Conservative leader. We defended supply management. We defended our aluminum and steel workers. We defended NAFTA and improved it for people on both sides of the border. But the Conservative Party and this Conservative leader, they're the ones who lowered investment in defense spending to less than 1% of GDP, and that had consequences for border security. We're the ones who are going to stand up for Canadian security. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The New York Times reported a decade ago that Canada had the richest middle class in the world, and the median incomes for Canadians were higher than in the United States. Oh, how things have changed after 9 years of liberal taxes, red tape, and a tax on our energy sector. Americans make $32,000 more than Canadians, and now a newly elected American president wants to take our jobs for Americans. We understand why Donald Trump wants to take Canadian jobs, but why does this Prime Minister want to help him?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when we successfully renegotiated NAFTA and protected Canadian jobs, protected steel workers and aluminum workers, protected our supply managed sectors and agricultural workers, protected Canadians from one coast to coast from coast to coast to coast, the leader of the Conservative Party at the time referred to our approach as dumb, Mr. Speaker. Successfully standing up for Canadians is not dumb. But you know what is dumb, Mr. Speaker? Refusing to get your security clearance so you can actually protect members of your caucus, so you can protect Canadians, get the briefings necessary on national security.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, his approach was dumb. It was dumb to let the Americans reimpose Buy America rules that Harper had got lifted. It was dumb to let Trump impose softwood lumber tariffs that Biden has now doubled. But you know what is dumb, dumber, and dumbest of all? Imposing a 61-cent a liter carbon tax that will force our trucking companies, our factories, and our mines to head south of the border into the arms of President Trump. We know why he wants to create American jobs with the Canadian money, but why does this Prime Minister want to help him?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we stood up and protected Canadian jobs, Canadian industry, and Canadian trade. We know that the American government cares about creating prosperity in North America, and we're going to do it together. But what the American government, and particularly this president, also cares about is defense and national security. Well, the leader of the Conservative Party was sitting around the cabinet table when they dropped spending on defense to below 1%, and the Americans won't understand any more than Canadians do why the leader of the opposition refuses to take national security seriously, refuses to get his...
Colleagues, I know it's Wednesday. It's really important, though, that we have an opportunity to only recognize the person who's speaking at the time so that the Speaker can hear what's going on. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the reason why Conservatives were able to get rid of Buy America and softwood lumber tariffs is because we helped the Americans crush the Taliban and ISIS, whereas this Prime Minister couldn't even shoot down a Chinese weather balloon over northern Canada. Now he wants to impose a tariff on his own companies, a 61 cent a litre carbon tax, 300% higher than it is right now, where there's a 0% carbon tax south of the border. Why does he want to create an avalanche of Canadian businesses, jobs, and paychecks leaving for America?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we saw it once again right now. The Conservative leader constantly talking down the members of the Canadian Armed Forces, talking down and nickel and diming our veterans. They shuttered 9 veteran services offices, cut thousands of staff from people helping veterans, and made cuts to the Canadian Armed Forces that brought our spending on defense to below 1%. Mr. Speaker, he won't even commit to our timeline to get it up to 2%. And he will not get his security clearance so he can get the briefing necessary to keep all Canadians safe.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, 10 years ago, the New York Times said that Canada's middle class was the most affluent in the world and that the average income was higher in Canada than in the U.S. Today, the average Canadian worker earns $32,000 less than their American counterpart after tax. Because of all the taxes and economic obstacles the Liberals have put in place. Now the Americans want to steal our jobs and bring them to the U.S. Can there not be an election so that Quebecers can choose who is going to defend their jobs? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians remember very clearly what Stephen Harper's approach was, which was to bow down to the Americans. But we stood up to protect supply management, to renegotiate NAFTA, to protect our aluminum and steel workers. We will always stand up for the Canadian worker. And we're going to invest in national security, which is the thing that Conservatives failed to do. They lowered spending to less than 1% of GDP. And at the same time, the Conservative leader keeps refusing to get his security clearance and to take national security seriously. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, it seems likely that after the election of President Trump yesterday, a certain number, in fact, a definite number of people in the U.S. will seek to leave the U.S. and will seek asylum here in Canada. Has the government already made plans to manage the influx of asylum seekers, knowing that people who've been here for 2 weeks can make a refugee claim as they did through Roxham Road? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, like any responsible government, for months we've been preparing for whatever the outcome was of the U.S. election last night. We will always work to protect our economy, our workers in the forestry industry, our farmers, our aluminum and steel workers, and we're going to be there to protect the integrity of our borders and our immigration system. We've always been able to work well with the Americans, and we'll keep doing that in order to manage the border and the economy responsibly. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. That seems a bit of a general answer. It's a bit vague, given that there could be millions of people in the U.S. who are going to have to leave, perhaps even in short order. And if they happen to get through in an irregular fashion and stay for a couple of weeks, then they will be able to stay longer. Has the government taken steps to at least ensure that asylum seekers will be distributed according to the population of each province and Quebec? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this government has already shown its ability to work to protect the integrity of both our immigration system and our borders in working together with the Americans to improve the system and also to make sure that Roxham Road was closed down. We've been able to take steps to better distribute refugees across the country. We will continue to work responsibly and reasonably to ensure that our borders and our immigration system are managed responsibly.
Canadians are worried that Donald Trump's plans will hurt people. They're particularly worried that his plans to impose across-the-board tariffs are going to hurt Canadian jobs. It's going to mean that the cost of everything is going to go up. So will the Prime Minister today stand up today and say that Donald Trump's plans are wrong?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as we've demonstrated before, we will continue to work constructively with the American administration. We will continue to defend Canadian jobs and interests while we look to create growth and prosperity on both sides of the border. We stood up for Canadian agricultural workers, for Canadian steel and aluminum workers, for Canadians from coast to coast to coast, and we did it with a Team Canada approach that brought together labor union, businesses, premiers of all different provinces. We will continue to work together to stand up for Canadians and create prosperity for everyone in North America.
That's right. The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Canadians are worried about losing their jobs.
What Donald Trump is proposing to do threatens jobs in Canada. He's threatening to put tariffs on things that will increase the cost of living and also threaten jobs at a time when the cost of living is already too high. Is the Prime Minister ready today to stand up and clearly state that Donald Trump is wrong? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, when Mr. Trump, during his first term as president, threatened to rip up NAFTA, we were able to work with him not just to defend workers and the Canadian economy, but also to improve the deal to create opportunities for everyone in North America. We will continue to work responsibly to defend the values, interests, and jobs of Canadians, while at the same time knowing that we can do this together to create more prosperity all across North America. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. After Mr. Harper managed to get rid of the tariffs on softwood lumber, this Prime Minister caved in and allowed those tariffs to be reimposed, and now they've been doubled by Mr. Biden. President Trump is threatening to go even further. There are already hundreds of workers in the Saguenay who've lost their jobs because this Prime Minister caved in. When will there be an election so Canadians can choose a Prime Minister who will defend our jobs and bring back good paychecks? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, a few years ago, when we were able to defend NAFTA and Canadian jobs and workers, we were able to work with Conservative premiers, with unions, with workers and industry associations all across the country as Team Canada in order to defend our interests and create growth all across North America. But you know who didn't get involved in that exercise was the Conservative leader who was sulking and said that we had to give in because it wasn't going to work. That's not what people want. People want a government that will stand up for them. The Right Honourable Leader of the Opposition. He also gave in on Buy America, that policy that was discriminatory against our construction, steel, and aluminum firms who could no longer sell their products for construction projects, government or public projects. And that was, we had an exemption for years under Harper, but then it was reimposed under Trump with this Prime Minister's agreement. He signed a so-called free trade deal, but that included Buy America as part of the deal. So can we have an election so that we can fight for our construction workers and other workers? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will always work with the Americans to create prosperity while at the same time defending our workers here. But speaking of defense, Mr. Speaker, we will not be lectured by the member opposite. He was a member of Harper's cabinet and the current Conservative leader was there when they decided to reduce investment in defense to below 1% of GDP, which the Americans absolutely did not want us to do. We're going to increase it to 2%, and they refused to commit to that. He also refuses to get the security clearance he needs in order to deal with national security files. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. At the time, our per capita GDP was equal to the American. In fact, Canadian workers were earning more than their American counterparts. But after 9 years of taxes and this government's economic obstacles, this radical liberal government's obstacles, we can see that Americans are now earning $34,000 more per person. And the GDP has increased by 18% per capita, while it's gone down in Canada. We know why Mr. Trump wants to create jobs in the U.S. Why does this Prime Minister want to help him do that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I know Donald Trump well enough to know that he would be very confused, as are Canadians, in trying to understand why the Leader of the Opposition, in these uncertain times with hostility abroad and so on, why does he keep refusing to get the security clearance he needs in order to get top secret briefings so that he can protect his members and Canadians? The Conservative leader refuses to get security briefings. Donald Trump wouldn't understand that, and Canadians don't either.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
What President Trump must not understand, must actually find kind of humorous, is that while he wants to take jobs from other countries and give them to Americans, he sees here in Canada a Prime Minister that wants to help him do it. Yeah. Let's review the track record. He brought in a massive tax on energy that he wants to quadruple, which will drive our trucking, manufacturing, factories, and other businesses abroad. He raised taxes on investment. He's blocked key energy projects, and he's shipped $500 billion down to the United States. Is the Prime Minister auditioning to be the Secretary of Job Creation in the United States?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Leader of the Opposition needs to get his facts straight. In the 9 years since we took office, foreign direct investment has increased by 60% in this country, so much so that we are now #1 per capita for foreign direct investment last year in the G20. Mr. Speaker, we continue to work hand in hand with the United States, with whatever administration, to protect jobs, to grow our economies. But what the American government will not understand is why the Conservative leader continues to refuse to get the security clearance necessary to protect Canadians, to protect us all from foreign interference.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, 10 years ago, our per capita GDP, that's income per person, was equal to that in the United States. The New York Times said Canadians were richer and our workers were making more money. But since that time, the American economy has grown by 18% per person. And in Canada, it's actually smaller. We've had the worst per capita GDP decline of any G7 country since the year before COVID, all after this Prime Minister hiked taxes on investment, on work, on business, and unleashed a wicked attack on our energy sector. Again, why is it that he keeps trying to create jobs for Americans? Why don't we bring the jobs home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
And Mr. Speaker, we see the Conservative leader cherry-picking his numbers. The reality is the IMF predicts Canada have stronger economic growth next year than the United States. Full stop. What he is trying to do is continue to talk down our economy and pretend that maybe he's going to be able to deal with an American government that will not understand why he dropped defense spending to below 1% of GDP when he was last around the cabinet table, why he continues to refuse to get the necessary security clearance to get the briefings to keep his own caucus safe, much less all Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I can't think of anyone who would more favor quadrupling the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre in Canada than this Prime Minister? Well, maybe there's one person. I think perhaps President Trump wouldn't mind, because of course it will mean our trucking companies, our factories, our mines will all shut down and go south of the border where they will pay zero carbon tax. Mr. Speaker, we have enough to worry about with President Trump potentially imposing tariffs on Canadian companies. Why would our government impose tariffs on ourselves?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition demonstrates that he has no understanding that the only way to build a stronger economy for the future is also to protect the environment at the same time while putting more money back in the pockets of Canadians. The Canada Carbon Rebate puts more money back in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, according to top economists and environmentalists across the country. We're putting more money in people's pockets that the Leader of the Opposition wants to take away at a time where investments in jobs, in growth, in the future is more important than ever before.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, even the opposition leader is concerned about President Trump's economic policies. There must be a problem here. A problem with trade, a problem with supply management, with aluminum, with softwood lumber. Coming back to supply management, isn't it time to urgently protect supply management and pass C-282? And he should call on his senators to pass that bill. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I've been saying from the outset, we agree with that bill, and we are trying to make sure it passes through the Senate. We need to show how firm we are about supply management, about our support for it. We've always stood up for it. We're the government that promised to never give up anything in any future trade deals when it comes to supply management. And we're going to keep our word. I'm glad that the Bloc is supporting us in that endeavor, and we will continue to protect our supply-managed farmers. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. The comparison between the government's will and firmness and its actual results is pretty obvious. A lot of economists say that the economic policies of Republicans will cause inflation. Isn't it time to urgently protect the purchasing power of those aged 65 to 74 by restoring equity within the OAS for everyone, as the Bloc is demanding? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we all know how global inflation has been difficult for Canadians, particularly for seniors, and that's why, as a government, we worked so hard to bring inflation down in Canada faster than in the U.S. and in other parts of the world. And that's also why interest rates have gone down quicker in Quebec than in other parts of the world. We will continue to be a government that manages public finances responsibly in order to make sure that people can continue to enjoy lower interest rates, and we will continue to invest in programs like dental care and pharmacare that will help seniors too. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Having capitulated and allowed President Trump to reimpose the softwood lumber tariffs that Stephen Harper had taken off, and now Biden having doubled those tariffs, our softwood industry hemorrhaging jobs. One way to boost the industry is to build some homes. It turns out I've got a common sense plan to cut the wasteful bureaucracy that has built zero homes and use the savings to axe the sales tax and boost home building by 30,000 new homes per year. Will the Prime Minister accept my common sense plan?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the problem with the Leader of the Opposition's so-called plan is that it actually cuts billions of dollars of investments from municipalities across the country who are counting on it to build hundreds and even thousands of units of housing that Canadians so desperately need. His plan is, once again, cuts and austerity, fights with municipalities, fights with the provinces, not building the homes that matter for Canadians. Once again, he's completely out to lunch, demonstrating an unwillingness to help Canadians, except a willingness to help himself with political attacks.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, he's doubled housing costs, and Canada has the fewest homes per capita of any country in the G7. Maybe it's because his housing minister said of these $8 billion of bureaucracies, quote, the Housing Accelerator Fund doesn't go towards the cost of building houses. It actually doesn't lead to the construction of specific homes. The Housing Accelerator doesn't actually fund directly building homes. And it's built 0 homes. 0 homes built with this bureaucracy. So why not follow my common sense plan to axe the sales tax and build the homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, 18 Conservative caucus members stood up and asked for housing investments in their municipalities across the country from this Housing Accelerator Fund that he is promising to cut. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to channel my old job as a school teacher. The Leader of the Opposition actually spent a lot of time and effort rooting out which 18 members had asked for this money for their municipalities for housing. If he spent half as much time rooting out foreign interference as he did rooting out people who are asking for more housing, we might be better off as a country.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
No, these MPs were just trying to solve the case of unsolved mysteries. Yes. Where are all these homes? They said, could you point out any one of them? And so they wrote the minister 18 letters, and he got 18 letters, and he couldn't respond with even one home that his $8 billion bureaucracy has built. All these 18 MPs tried to help the hopeless minister. So let me try again with a real plan to build the homes. Axe the tax.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the MP for St. Albert Edmonton asked, the requested federal funding is critical to making this needed development a reality, a development that will help address the significant shortage of affordable housing options in the community. At the same time, the mayor of Butternut Valley in New Brunswick pointed out that this is a program we need, and even the local MP had said this funding will provide much needed housing in the
I don't like to interrupt the Prime Minister. He does have time left on his clock, but it was difficult for the Chair to decipher what was being said. I'm going to ask the Honourable Prime Minister to take it for the last 15 seconds, please, and so that I can hear what is happening or what the question is being answered. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the MP for Fundy Royal wrote, this half funding will provide much needed housing in this area. So much so that when the Leader of the Opposition announced he would cancel it, the Mayor of Butternut Valley in that riding, Alan Brown, responded very strongly that this money will help build homes, and why is the Conservative Leader blocking it?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, he's got lots of politicians that love to receive other people's money, but he doesn't have any homes to show for it. And listen, he's too afraid to have a carbon tax election. Let's have a compromise here. Why don't we have a housing tax election? Okay? Here's how it would work. The MDP Liberals will campaign on giving the billions more to bureaucracies, and we'll campaign on a plan to axe the tax and build the homes. What do you say? Housing tax?
Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the only so-called plan the Leader of the Opposition put forward is a plan for cuts and austerity, a plan to cut billions of dollars of investments that are needed by municipalities to unlock the building of thousands of homes. Why doesn't he want to see thousands of homes built across the country? Because he'd rather instrumentalize for his own political gain the sufferings and the challenges facing by Canadians rather than to solve the challenges. Just like he refuses to solve the challenge of foreign interference in his own caucus by refusing to get the necessary security briefings and security clearance that'll keep his caucus and Canadians safe.
You're losing your caucus.
The honourable member from Burnaby South.
The Liberals continue to break their promise to eliminate the marriage after 60 pension clause. They label women as gold diggers and push veterans and their families into poverty. This government announced $150 million for veterans 5 years ago, but hasn't spent a single penny. Veterans and their families are owed a good life. Will the Prime Minister eliminate this sexist, archaic pension clause, or does he still believe veterans are asking for too much?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've invested over $11 billion in supports for veterans over the past years after the Conservative government demonstrated that they were nickeling, diming veterans for photo ops, shuttering 9 veteran service centres, firing thousands of people working to directly support veterans. We've been there for our veterans. We will continue to invest in supports for them. We will continue to protect them from the Conservative cuts. We will be there to honour and recognise their service, not just this week on Veterans Week, but every single week throughout the year.
The honourable member from Nunavut.
More and more Indigenous people are still dying at the hands of law enforcement. Despite urgent calls to save lives, the Liberals have done nothing. I grieve with the Inuit family in Sudluit, Nunavik, after their son Joshua was killed. We need justice for twins Joshua and Garnet Papigatuk. We need more de-escalation tactics and Indigenous-led crisis response teams. When will this government listen to the urgent demands from Indigenous peoples so they can live in safe communities?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Kuyanamik, for my colleague's question, we know how difficult situations there are in far too many Indigenous communities, including Inuit communities across Nunavut, which is why we've tripled investments into Indigenous communities since 2015, with $32 billion in investments expected in 2024-2025 alone. We know there is much more to do, including even stronger partnerships on Indigenous policing, on community security, community safety, on housing, on supports for young people. There is much more to do. We will continue to work hand in hand, work with local governments and Indigenous governments to get it done.
The Honourable Member for Marc-Aurèle-Fortin. Mr. Speaker, last year we signed an historic agreement with Quebec in order to mobilize joint investments of $1.8 billion in affordable housing. As part of the Housing Accelerator Fund, and last week, the Conservative leader announced his intent to cut this fund and to tear up our agreement with Quebec, jeopardizing all the housing projects. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'd like to thank my colleague from Marc-Aurèle-Fortin. The Conservatives' plan is to cancel housing projects across the country. In Quebec, its solution is to tear up the agreement we signed with that province to the tune of $900 million for affordable housing projects. We're talking about some 8,000 of those projects. Even the Minister of Finance Quebec thinks that this Conservative leader is costly and inefficient. So we can't count on, Quebecers cannot count on the Conservative leader because all he will do is cut, cut, cut. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister capitulated and allowed Trump to reimpose tariffs. And there are 3 sawmills in Saguenay that had to shut down. One way of stimulating the demand for Canadian lumber is by building homes. But the Prime Minister is fighting to build bureaucracy. And so they're not building houses at all. I propose the idea of removing the GST on new homes, which would allow for the building of 30,000 some homes. Would he call an election to make sure that the GST can be removed from new homes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers see very clearly what this Conservative Party is trying to do. It is trying to cut everywhere and ensure an austerity plan. The Conservative leader would cut $900 million of joint investments with Quebec to create some 8,000 affordable homes. That is what he wants to do. He just wants cuts for Quebecers. He is throwing an agreement into the garbage. He's petty politicking, and that's not what Quebecers need. They need investments and they need homes, and that's what he wants to cut. Before continuing with the Leader of the Opposition, I would just like to remind all members, and I've seen this on both sides, please do not rise too much before the Speaker recognizes you because it distracts me somewhat. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
It would be bad enough for the Prime Minister to want to give our energy jobs to the Americans who've doubled their production over the last couple of decades, but he wants to actually give it over to the Venezuelan, Iranian, and Russian dictatorships by cutting Canadian energy production by 35%. Mr. Speaker, the Americans reduced their emissions by more than, while ours went up, by increasing natural gas production and using it to replace dirty coal. We could do exactly the same. Why won't he follow a common sense plan to produce more clean, green Canadian energy rather than giving our jobs to dirty dictators?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Performance was designed to distract from is the fact that under the Conservative government of Mr. Harper and that current leader, they couldn't get anything built. We built the Trans Mountain Pipeline extension. We built TMX. We understand that getting good prices for our oil was important, not just for Alberta, but for the entire Canadian economy. And we are moving forward to make sure that even as the oil companies are making record profits, we're putting a cap on emissions, not on production, not on profits, but on emissions, because Canadians care.
I ask the honourable member from Lakelands please not take the floor unless he's recognized by the chair. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Common sense Conservatives approved and saw the completion of 4 pipelines with no tax dollars to subsidize them. And we believe businesses should make money rather than take money. By contrast, this Prime Minister has pushed $100 billion of energy investment out of Canada, most of it into the United States. And once again, I can imagine that the champagne will be popping over at the Trump Tower when they find out how much more Canadian money this Prime Minister wants to send south. Why does he want to kill Canadian jobs? Why don't we bring home production and paychecks for our people?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The Leader of the Opposition just admitted that he wouldn't have put a penny into TMX. He wouldn't have made it happen. This is something that matters to Alberta. It matters to the oil workers there.
Order. Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader just admitted he would not have invested in TMX. He would not have gotten it built. But, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the aisle, we will stand up for Alberta. We will stand up for oil and gas workers across the country, because we know that getting overseas markets for our oil and gas is...
Colleagues, it should be possible for the honourable member from Lakelands, please. The Honourable Prime Minister, 25 seconds left, please.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we see that the Conservative leader will not stand up for workers across the country. He won't stand up for Albertan oil workers. We got the TMX pipeline built because we know that getting a better price for our oil by being able to ship it across the Pacific is a way of creating jobs and prosperity that allow us to build strong jobs and economy for the future. The Conservative leader does not understand that we need to invest in workers to build a stronger future, not offer them cuts.
That's right.
That was hilarious.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, when we were in government, we didn't have to offer $30 billion bailouts for pipelines because they made money. That's how business works. He wants to create a bailout economy. And let's clarify how this worked.
Yeah, let's.
$30 billion, $7 billion of which went to a Texas oil company, which took our tax dollars down to Texas to build American pipelines. Mr. Speaker, all our X's are in Texas. Why don't we bring home those jobs for Canada?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Just heard it perfectly clearly.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we just heard it very clearly from the leader of the Conservative Party. He would not have built the TMX pipeline. That's right. Mr. Speaker, we know how important it is to make sure we get a good price for our oil so we can invest in the kinds of solutions and technologies that are going to continue to create prosperity and opportunity for energy workers, not just in Alberta, but right across the country. We will continue to be there to invest in a stronger future by understanding that renewables are an important part of the future, but we need to be able to pay for them. The Conservative leader does not understand how to build a strong future or how to build a strong economy.
That's it.
Then I have
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the votes have not even finished being counting in the United States, and there's already a debate between the Conservative leader and the Prime Minister to see which one will support the oil patch more strongly. That is nonsense. So are they completely turning their back on any consideration of climate change, and that the green economy is being abandoned to give place to the oil patch? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I can see the irony here when I hear that coming from someone who approved oil drilling in Anticosti. He knows very well that we need to build a greener economy and protect the environment at the same time, and it's possible. That's why we have capped greenhouse gas emissions in the oil industry across the country. We have also put a price on pollution to put more money in the pockets of Canadians, and we have continued to reduce our emissions while creating economic growth, which is a first for Canada. We're going to create jobs and protect the environment. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. I might tell the Prime Minister to check his facts because I never approved any such drilling in Anticosti. Now, that being said, let's talk about security because tomorrow I am going to become the other leader in the House who has seen the report that will name the MPs who have been compromised by foreign interference. So there is still one left who doesn't want to clean up his caucus. So will the Prime Minister, will he ensure that he is going to put 2% into defense spending? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. It is clear that I don't always agree with the leader of the Bloc Québécois, but I must recognize and thank him for having gotten his security clearance so he can get his security briefings like all other party leaders except for the Conservative leader. who does have a responsibility to protect our democracy, the Conservative leader, for unexplainable reasons, I don't know what he has to hide, he refuses to get his security clearance. He refuses to get secret security briefings that would allow him to protect his party and thus democracy. We don't know why, but he refuses to take this seriously, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Given that we've just seen an American election, I think I can quote another American president who could aptly describe the Prime Minister's economic policy. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. If it stops moving, subsidize it. Yep. Instead of doing none of the above, which would allow our entrepreneurs to actually build things on their own without sticking taxpayers with the bill. He wants to know our common sense plan? We will repeal the unconstitutional C-69. We will scrap the cap. We will axe the tax. Why won't he call a carbon tax election so that we can bring home these jobs?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, when we stood up for Canadian jobs, Canadian oil producers, Canadian oil, steel and aluminum workers, the Conservative Party called that dumb. Mr. Speaker, we will always stand up and defend Canadian jobs, as we have in the past, as we create more opportunities for Canadians right across the country, and as we protect our national security. What the Americans will not understand is why the Leader of the Opposition, who desperately wants to become Prime Minister, refuses to get the necessary security clearances so he can keep his party safe.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I've already explained how $500 billion of our dollars have left the country since this Prime Minister took office. Canadian investment dollars paying American workers while our people can't afford food and homes. But don't take my word on how uninvestable the country has become. Take the word of carbon tax Carney. Right. The Prime Minister's lead economic advisor has just moved his $100 billion company to New York City. If the Prime Minister's own top economic advisor doesn't have faith in his economic plan, then why should anyone else?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what the Leader of the Conservative Party hasn't explained is why he's treating national security like a dodgeball game. He ducks allegations of foreign interference in his own caucus. He dives away from dives as he turns a blind eye towards investments in our communities by foreign interferers, and he dodges the tools necessary to keep his party safe. Why won't he get the briefing, get the clearance, protect Canadians?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister likes to spread crackpot conspiracy theories instead of defending his economic record. But why wouldn't he? When you've doubled housing costs, you distract. When you've doubled food bank use, you divide. When you've doubled gun crime, you use fear to turn people's attention away. And when you've doubled the national debt to a point that even your top economic advisor is fleeing the economic carnage you have created, you do anything possible to change the subject. If he can't defend his economic record, why not have a carbon tax election so that I can take it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Can't even defend the members of his own caucus because he refuses to get the necessary security clearance. And he likes to talk about crackpot conspiracy theories. It's not a crackpot conspiracy theory when his own members of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians signed a report that was released publicly that talks about the fact that the Indian government interfered in the past Conservative leadership campaigns. Or is that perhaps why he refuses to get the security clearance necessary, because he doesn't think he'd pass the security clearance because of Indian interference in his own.
Who do you have next? Huh? The Honourable Member from Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian veterans have bravely stood on the front lines, often at significant personal sacrifice to protect the values that Canadians hold dear. They deserve our unwavering and ongoing support. Veterans still recall the severe cuts made by the previous Conservative government, which dismantled the very institutions meant to support them. Can the Prime Minister inform this House about the measures our government has implemented to enhance and expand the important supports our Canadian veterans deserve?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Kitchener-Conestoga for his hard work and his leadership. Conservatives didn't think twice when they cut vital supports for veterans and their loved ones. They even had the nerve to tell veterans, and still are saying it, to tell veterans that closing and cutting over 1,000 workers wouldn't impact veterans' abilities to get support, which of course it did. While Conservatives slashed supports for our veterans, this Liberal government has invested more than $11 billion in supports for veterans and their families. That is the right thing to do.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The cost, crime, or corruption. We know that Parliament has been paralyzed for weeks now because he refuses to hand over evidence to the police in the $400 million Liberal slush fund scandal. Now we find out what he might be hiding. It turns out that his radical environment minister has a stake in one of the companies that got 10 million of those dollars. This is a scam, and by the way, the official that handed over the money had interest in the very same company. Is the Prime Minister covering this up because he's worried about the questions the police might have for his minister?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, despite the efforts of the Conservative leader to partisanize and polarize everything, we still live in a country where the police are independent, the judiciary is independent, and the RCMP has clearly stated that they don't need and don't particularly want the documents that the Leader of the Opposition is freezing Parliament over. We will continue to stand up for the integrity and the independence of our police services, and we will, while we're at it, continue to encourage the Leader of the Opposition to get the necessary security clearance to see the threats to Canadians and protect his own caucus.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Le Journal de
The Journal de Montréal revealed this morning that Cycle Capital Business received $10 million from the Green Fund that is at the heart of the major scandal, which involves $400 million. Who owns this company? Who has an interest in this company? The Minister of the Environment, Mr. Speaker. Now, is that why the Prime Minister is paralyzing Parliament in order to deprive the RCMP of evidence regarding this scandal? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers and all Canadians understand how important it is to have independent police forces who have nothing to do with politics. Despite the efforts of the Conservative leader to polarize the work done by the RCMP and other police forces, we are going to respect their work and allow them to do their job. As we expect the Conservative leader to take his responsibilities seriously with regard to national security by getting his security clearance to get his security briefings and to protect his own MPs from foreign interference. I would invite the honourable members to not take the floor unless they've been recognized by the Speaker. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister was caught paying $9 million tax dollars to buy a luxury, super exclusive condo on Billionaires Row for his media pal and diplomat in New York. Tom Clark, the diplomat in question, denied he had any involvement in it. Well, now we have documents showing that he said, and I quote, his housing required immediate replacement. It wasn't suitable for hosting or for living. Wow. Wait till he finds out about the 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario, Mr. Speaker. Why, while Canadians live through housing hell, must they spend their tax dollars on a $9 million palace in the sky?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, At the same time as the leader of the opposition is playing silly games around partisanship and choosing to attack our hardworking diplomats and use people in homeless encampments as props while offering nothing but cuts of billions of dollars worth of investments, he is refusing to take seriously allegations made by the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians that his very leadership, the leadership in which that diplomat, as a former journalist, moderated, was interfered with by the Indian government.
Order. 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 Colleagues. The honourable member from Guelph.
Mr. Speaker, foreign interference poses a real threat to democracies around the world. Bad actors like Russia, China, and India use shady tactics to sow division and to further their own goals in countries like Canada. Yet there's a deafening silence coming from the leader of the opposition. Can the Prime Minister please explain to Canadians what is at stake and why the Conservative leader needs to take this seriously?
Colleagues, it is important so that people who do not speak the other official language have the opportunity to hear the questions. So please do not talk when you are not recognized by the speaker. It is very difficult, out of respect to our colleagues who speak another official language. Please don't do that. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Guelph for his important question. The Conservative leader doesn't do what's best for Canadians. He does what's best for his algorithm. He turns a blind eye to foreign interference as his own party because that boosts his YouTube following. Now he's dodging his security clearance because he's worried that that won't play well in his echo chamber. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Conservative Party needs to take care and focus on Canadians instead of worrying about his own troll farm.
The honourable member from Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, young Canadians are facing a serious crisis. Youth unemployment is now double the national average, and job security and workplace benefits are becoming a thing of the past. The cost of food is soaring, rent is skyrocketing, and the cost of living is crushing. Young people don't have a fair shot under the Liberals, and the Conservatives' only answer is to cut services. Mr. Speaker, young Canadians need hope and opportunity. Why is this Prime Minister letting them down?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I should think that young Canadians are preoccupied that the NDP seems to be letting them down by backing off on their commitment to put a price on pollution that also puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians with the Canada carbon rebate. I should be concerned that the NDP is continuing to allow the House debate to freeze and not pass our capital gains measures that are putting more money in the pockets of young people while asking those who are making over $250,000 a year in capital gains to make a smaller profit on those gains. We're there for young people. We hope the NDP would be there too.
The honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, at the time that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was signed, There was no left-right, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative divide on doing what science required. Maggie Thatcher and Brian Mulroney were front of the pack to get the treaty. But now that Donald Trump is re-entering the White House, we know that one of his first acts was to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. Can the Prime Minister update us? What is the Government of Canada and like-minded countries doing to protect the multilateral international system, as flawed as it may be, to deliver on climate action?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What has become increasingly clear to everyone around the world, whether it's citizens or investors or governments of all political stripes, is you cannot have a plan to grow the economy and support your citizens if you don't at the same time have a plan to reduce emissions and fight climate change. That's how we create the prosperity, the jobs, the opportunities for future generations. We will continue to work hand in hand with partners from around the world as we protect biodiversity, as we create jobs, as we lower emissions, as we draw in investment, as we create the solutions on energy and technology that are going to bring Canadians forward.
I wish to draw to the attention of members to the presence in the gallery of our former colleague and